Well, I'm pleased to say that here we are a month later, and Joe Roach is still Sterling Professor Emeritus of Theater and English at Yale. The Sterling Professorship, as I mentioned before, is the highest level of professorship at Yale. He's been an actor, director, as well as scholar, the author of numerous books, and he's been leading our thinking about this play. And so I'll just hand the stage over to him right away.
Well, thank you, Bob, and welcome everyone back to our discussion on this April Fool's Day. Well, timed considering the nature of the inspector as a text in the history of dramatic literature, and as we have seen it, a performance in the theater, live and on stage. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome back our two dramaturgs, Georgia Peterson and Sophia Carey. They worked on this production from the beginning, and their work was really, I thought, in evidence, obviously in the materials that accompanied the production, the program notes, and in the educational package that was circulated. There were others involved in that, but it was a remarkable project by the drama school in putting together the intellectual history, the theatrical history, and the artistic framework for a production that is a really exciting example of a particular kind of approach to the classics. I'm going to say a few words about that. Then I'm going to invite Georgia and Sophia to join the dialogue. We'll talk for a while and in colloquy, and then we'll open it up for your questions and thoughts and comments, and feel free in this presentation, which is in fact a talk back. It's an opportunity for the production and its representatives, in the case of the two dramaturgs, outside monitor or arbiter, host, Bob, and of course it's my role to add comments and thoughts, but it's really the audience that makes the theater, and you are the audience. And this is a good chance to freely ask what you would most like to ask, and that includes expressing your criticisms and questions about why certain choices were made, whether you liked them or didn't like them. It's always great when you can preface a criticism with a comment on something you did like about the production. It helps to smooth the dialogue, but that isn't required. And I hope we'll hear your vigorous and candid thoughts as we go on. So I saw the production early on. It was in previews still, and it was still under construction. A preview is just that. It's a chance for the artist to try out the play on a new audience every night and change it after that performance. It isn't what we call frozen yet in what it will be in the script when it's set and it's opened and the reviewers have been there, and the stage manager and not the director is in charge of the production, and the stage manager's job is to make sure that it goes pretty much as it was frozen when it was set to go into performance after previews. The nature of this production, as I mentioned last time, Ura is an auteur director. He feels confident in taking a script of a classic play and reshaping it according to his vision and the vision of his collaborators on the team, the dramaturgs and the designers, as well as working intensively with the actors on their characterizations and performance. And a couple of phrases that come up in the theater that might be useful to our discussions and in helping you to frame your questions. One of them is levels of stylization. When the European avant-garde began its innovations at the end of the 19th century. The first movement to establish itself was naturalism. And it was a radical attempt to replicate on the stage life exactly as it was observed in the contemporary society, even to the point of taking slabs of beef from a butcher shop and hanging them on the stage for a play about butchers, and even to the point of going around to cafes and writing down dialogue of people's conversations and then staging them in the theater. The idea was to take a slice of life, a tranche de vie, exactly as it was lived. And in a way, what that movement did was set up the conditions for departures from that standard of fidelity to nature by what the artists could do in their expressiveness to transform lived reality as it was observed into a much more symbolic or expressionistic or surrealistic or futuristic. And as I mention these words, I'm going through the movements that came about in the avant-garde after that. And I think the two most prominent in relation to the style of the production we saw in its level of stylization are surrealism and expressionism. And just quickly, in expressionism, you feel that you're in a nightmare. It's reality distorted to the point where it's a very bad dream. In visual, cultural history, in art history, you might, if you can conjure it, bring into your vision the image of Edvard Munch's The Scream, that character on the bridge, face distorted. The whole sky is distorted by the power of the scream. And in surrealism, it is like a dream, not necessarily a terrible dream or a bad dream. Sometimes it can even be a very funny dream with watches melting and bending over objects in the persistence of memory by Salvador Dali, or in the paintings of Rene Magritte, you have a huge stone floating in a perfectly blue sky. And this is an art that takes reality and raises the level of stylization. And in The Inspector, you had a combination of that framework of naturalism. You had a household on stage, a recognizable household, but it was a strange household. It was both indoors and outdoors at the same time, as it sometimes is in a dream. And it was snowing, but it was snowing inside the house as well as outside. And so you are suddenly introduced into a world where you might call it magical realism. The first thing you see as a character is a very realistic rat head on a human body. And then other rats in various skeletal versions enter the stage. And you realize you're in a world that isn't the world that we see every day in naturalism and realism. It is a world in which there is an artistic intervention in a mediation between art and life that insists on its own values. The other thing I want to say, and then I'm going to ask the dramaturgs to enter into the discussion, is that there are basically two forms of theater. One is representational, where the audience and its presence are not acknowledged. You're looking through a frame into a slice of life, and as far as the actors are concerned, you're not there. The house is darkened, and you're in one world, and the world of the play is another world, even though you're there simultaneously with it. That is representational theater. The other is presentational theater, which acknowledges its own theatricality by addressing you specifically, by calling you out and your presence there, and insisting on it by making you aware that they, the artists on the stage, are aware of your presence. With that as a bit of an introduction, I want to bring in our two fabulous dramaturgs. I think very highly of the work that they are doing. And I'd like them to begin the conversation by telling you what they're doing now since the show is closed, and then taking us back into the process of making this show and bringing it to you as the Home Haven audience. So Georgia and Sophia, if you want to jump in, please do.
Sure. Thanks so much, Joe, for that great introduction and really fabulous context. And hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's good to see a lot of faces again. And if you hear yelling or stomping behind me, it's because I'm now at work on uh, a play called Sort by Ida Cutler, who is a third year graduating playwright at the school. We're preparing for the Carlotta Festival at the Drama School, which is the festival of third year thesis plays. So the kind of culmination of all the playwrights' work gets fully staged, and it's really kind of the one process at the school where all of the disciplines um, uh, from design to dramaturgy to directing to playwriting to technical design and production to marketing and theater management and stage management all get lumped into one. And so it's a really fabulous collaborative process that is quite different from working at the rep. But
And you're coming, Georgia, if I could just amplify this point, from working on a classic play, well-known, oft-produced, working on a play that's never been seen before.
yeah,
It's a new
yeah.
creation, and the actors are literally creating the roles. No other actor has ever worked on those roles to bring them to life. No other dramaturg has had a say on this play, and you're working with the playwright every day, I imagine, in as the rewrites happen as you're heading toward opening.
That's exactly right. And uh, I'll also say that in the same way, though, that we began the inspector with a workshop last August, and kind of established this convention of working on this translation and adaptation kind of as a new play that had some kind of precedent,
Mhm.
which is funny and had its own kind of manifestations and kinks, though none of them dire in any way. This is also a play that I first of which I first heard a draft last summer, basically at the same time, and have been in kind of slow conversation with Ida Cutler, the playwright, as we are good friends and also work at a bakery together. So we get to kind of chat about it
You mean
once a week between customers. And
you mean being a
uh,
full-time student at the drama school isn't your only job?
well, I have to have some kind of engagement with my hands and a world of things. And so that's
Yes, well, that
yeah,
is fascinating.
once a week.
Sophia, do you want to
Yeah.
jump in and tell us what you're doing right now after the show closed?
Yes, I'm no longer in a rehearsal process, but the main thing I'm working on right now is because I'm a third year student in the MFA program in dramaturgy, we have what are called comprehensive exams to sort of close out our MFA process. And so for these, we choose two topics in theater history to study over the course of our third year, one each semester. And so I'm currently working on studying symbolist drama, which is actually one of the avant-gardes that Joe mentioned, in between naturalism and expressionism. So I'm studying symbolist drama. This is drama from the end of the 19th century. It's an international movement, a lot in France, but also Ireland, India, Russia, Ukraine, England, United States as well. And I'm looking at a lot of different subtopics within symbolist drama, but specifically I'm looking at the plays of Maeterlinck, who's a Belgian playwright, who in symbolist drama is it's symbolical. objects of our world are used to stand in for ideas and experiences that can't necessarily be perceived by the senses. So it's very sort of mystical drama, very existential, very religious often. It's unlike naturalism in that it's people do not speak in ordinary ways. They speak in very poetic, heightened ways.
But it is
so I'm
mostly
looking,
representational, isn't it?
yes, there's not a lot of fourth wall breaking that happens in symbolism.
Yeah. That's
and so I'm looking at
go ahead, please.
the plays of Maeterlinck, and sort of how these plays, even though they're often set in medieval settings, they're looking back into the past, they're drawing from folklore and legends. They're also written at a time when so much technology is being innovated, where the fin de siècle, the end of the century, people are looking forward into modernity. And I'm looking at Maeterlinck's plays as plays that are both looking forward and back at the same time. And I'm also, in addition to Maeterlinck, looking at some women playwrights from this era and how they are using symbolism for their own political and gender-based politics.
Thank you. That is so illuminating about the life of the dramaturgy student, which is very much in some ways like a student of language and literature and cultural history. And in other ways, well, as a theater practitioner, you've been in the rehearsal room and now you're in the study. And the job that you're doing is putting those things together, what you learn and what you then put up on its feet with actors and the rest on the stage. Thank you for that, both of you. So I want to come back then to the process and ask you what you learned from the process, what surprised you, what your expectations were as you began, as they evolved, and then as they were realized in the production. What surprised you about audiences? What surprised you about the choices that Yura made and the actors and how they landed? Georgia, do you want to start that?
Sure. There, there was so much that surprised me. I mean, one thing is that the actors continued to have a real kind of awareness of the images that they were creating on stage and an awareness of who the audience was each night and kind of across the nights. That the actors continued to have kind of dramaturgical concerns that they could bring up with us. And that was really it was wonderful to be in a room with actors. We said this during the first session, but all of the actors are either alums of the program or current students in the program. So all of them have kind of a working knowledge of how to work with dramaturgs at the school, which when you have visiting artists, there's not always kind of the same lingua franca that there was in this process. So I think that to be with a group who kind of had some kind of working knowledge of lines of communication between actor and director, between actor and dramaturg, even kind of between actor and stage managers and designers. There was a sense of collaboration that I haven't necessarily felt in every process. So that was great. And then there were certain dramaturgical choices that I think Sophia and I agreed on. Some perhaps that we didn't agree on, though honestly I can't think of any. But that didn't go into the show, and I think the kind of like final week of previews, being in the room, hearing audiences respond or not respond, and being able to put that in an email to Yura Gordonsky, and say, here are our notes for the night, and kind of be able to listen to what he was listening for, or what he was looking for in our notes to then communicate with the actors, I think was
excellent. That's excellent.
really wonderful. And then
you were at every
every now and then to say,
preview. Yeah.
Yeah, we were at every preview. I took one night off that Sophia went to, and Sophia took one night off that I went to. But other than that, we were always there with each other. Yeah, yeah.
Sophia, what was your experience?
I think something I learned, I mean, the two things that came to mind were one that I learned very early on in the process, and one thing I learned during previews. The first thing I learned really early on when we did the workshop over the summer was we started with the full script that Gogol wrote, not adapted. And there are just so many words. It's so long. The characters speak in circles. They like the way that they speak is felt to me like that it was a text driven, it was a language driven play. And so I went in thinking that most of the work that we did with the actors was going to be around the text that they were speaking, and it was. We worked on text with the actors, but I was surprised at how much the physical life of these characters and the things that happen when they're not talking built out the world and became important, and that sometimes the language was actually less important than some other things that might be happening on stage. And so that was a discovery that I made early on. And then something, I think an assumption I had, but maybe didn't realize I had working on the show, was that if people didn't laugh in the audience, then we would have failed. And I think, yes, if no one ever laughs at any point in this watching this play, then maybe that's not what we wanted. But there were, on my first preview, there were some moments that I found really funny and people weren't laughing at. And my first impulse was, oh no, what do we have to fix it? What do we have to do to make people laugh at this? And I think what I realized through previews and also through the run was that, especially the way that Yura directed the play, that the play can succeed even if people don't find it laugh out loud funny. And I think many people often didn't, and maybe some things were funny and some things weren't. But I think because of the way that the production focused on the humanity of these characters and treated them as fully human existing, maybe not quite naturalistic, still kind of heightened, but still people that are not fully just types or stereotypes or archetypes. I think I realized that there are ways other than laughter that audiences are connecting with it, and that lack of laughter doesn't mean disengagement. It just means engagement of a different kind than I was expecting.
What's the biggest surprise in terms of the laughs that you were expecting but didn't get, and the ones that you weren't expecting and did get? The thing about comedy is it's much more, you got a feedback loop with the audience as you're up there as an actor. You don't always get that in a play where there isn't laughter, because their audience is telling you how they're responding pretty much regularly. Can you think of one of those? Yeah.
Yeah, a big one that we weren't expecting, but we did sometimes get, depending on the audience, was if you saw the show right before the end, the mayor, at the end, the mayor breaks the fourth wall. It becomes presentational, and he speaks to the audience and he says, "What are you laughing at? You're laughing at yourselves." And in rehearsal, we were talking about that moment. We were thinking, well, what are we going to do? Because at that point, after Maria, the daughter, has had her heart broken, and everyone has had their money taken from them, and they've all realized that this is not the inspector. There's no way at all that people are going to be laughing. We're at the sort of deepest, saddest, most existential moment. And a lot of nights people did laugh right before that. And so Brandon, the actor who played the mayor, was able to say, "What are you laughing at? You're laughing at yourselves." And we were worried that if people weren't laughing, it would feel like, well, what is he calling them out on? If they're not laughing, why should he criticize them for laughing? They're not laughing anyway. So that was one where it was a sort of pleasant surprise in that it made the line work, but also interesting to think of. We really didn't expect laughter at that moment. And sometimes it happened. And there was, of course, different kinds of laughter. There's uncomfortable laughter. There's
there's funny haha and
laughter.
funny peculiar. And there was examples of both. Georgia, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I'll say
surprises?
one thing that I suppose maybe I shouldn't have expected a laugh, um, but I did and didn't get it, which is um, right at the beginning when the mayor is reading the letter and he gets to the end and he says, "Oh, the rest of this is it's all family matters," and he quickly goes through it, and it's the plot of Chekhov's Three Sisters, um, and very few people caught that. But it was very funny to Sophia and to me every night.
This is a
Uh,
joke that only dramaturgs are going to
that's
get.
exactly right. Yeah. There was always a little bit of a conversation in our dramaturgy practicum class, which is where as a group of three cohorts we all convene and talk about our processes. When Catherine Sheehy, who's the chair, would say, "Okay, what do you two think people's working knowledge of Russian literature and theater is going to be in the audience?" And Sophia and I, I always felt like I expect everyone to have read almost everything, um, and turns out that's just not what it is. But one thing I can name one moment that I think Sophia and I had a little bit of like what's going on during the first preview, which is uh, Dobchinski, played by Eddie Benzoni, um, when he's
Bobchinsky.
Bobchinski. um,
Easily
uh,
confused.
I know I can't believe I've mixed them up. Um, uh, but when he's going through the story of seeing the inspector, and it is a scene that takes what feels like 3 hours. Where in the rehearsal room, you often think that it'll start funny as you're doing read throughs, and then it'll kind of like um, become unfunny as you move through rehearsals, and then kind of get funny again in performances. And it was just completely aggravating that Eddie was funny every single time, like truly like gasping for air funny the entire rehearsal process. And that first preview, as he was doing uh, that monologue, it was like dead silent in the audience. And Sophia and I were like, "What is going
What's
on?"
happening?
And I do think that that we kind of found it in performance later. But oh my God, it was a moment of true panic. Like, what have we been? What's been our metric? But they came back.
Very good. Well, this
Speaking
is a good moment then to turn to the audience on this Zoom and ask them to come forward with their questions, thoughts, responses, their surprises, their candid views on what they saw, what they heard, what they felt. Lori.
I'd like to comment on that scene that you just brought up, Georgia. I was sitting in the second row with Jackie, and I thought it was hilarious what he did. And I think because we were sitting so close up, I saw every expression on his face, and I don't think I've ever seen such plasticity in an actor's face. I mean, all I could think of was that this young man is going to be the most like successful actor ever, because he just he just changed on a dime, his expression, his mood, his I mean, and I also thought, it was slightly psychotic. Like, how did he manage to manipulate himself so completely in such an insane way? And I just enjoyed it. I thought it was hilarious and I loved it.
Excellent. Lori or Kate, could I ask one of you to monitor the hand raising function
Yeah,
and
sure,
recognize the commentators? I can't see the whole screen. I
sure.
just get
I
to
can
one
do that.
bar. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, so people go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on the next one we see. Oh, nobody. Nan Ross and then Carrie Triffin. Nan, go ahead and unmute. Nan, you need to unmute.
Oh, this one.
There you
Okay.
go. Good.
I saw this play 40 years ago in New York City. It was a totally different interpretation. It was a satire. It was extremely moving in ways that I did not find this particular one as moving. I thought this interpretation was more or less a burlesque.
Hmm.
And so it had a totally different um, uh, affect as far as I can see. And the other thing that I thought, I saw it for the preview, at the preview, and everybody there, well, I would say 90% of the audience were kids, what I consider kids. Um, and 10% were elderly like myself. And the laughter was so fascinating to me because there were so many times when I didn't feel any desire to laugh. It did not make me feel as if I should laugh. Whereas obviously the today's interpretation is very different from the way I see this play.
Thank you for that. Great to have that perspective in time. Carrie?
Well, Nan answered one of my questions, which was, is the play always done this way? Slapstick, or that's not necessarily the right term, but the the question that I would have, could you explain to me the difference between dramaturg, director, and maybe producer?
Yeah, definitely. I guess to address the first part of the question and also Nan's as well, it's super interesting to hear because I saw a production of The Government Inspector 2 years ago, I think, that was purely slapstick. It was more burlesque, more vaudeville, even than our production. It was just people constantly falling over each other. And I basically didn't stop laughing from the beginning to the end. But also, I didn't care about the characters as much. And I think it's sort of the trade-off. I think our production maybe is less moving, possibly because there is still that sort of farcical humor. But it's definitely not always done this way at all. Something that the director wanted to do was sort of strike a balance in between slapstick farce and more naturalistic, more Chekhovian, grounded human stories. And so this is a production at a particular point on that line that not every production is.
Oh, that's great. I like that sense. Okay. And dramaturg versus director versus producer?
Yeah, maybe Georgia has a better way of saying it. I guess very practically, the director is the person that leads rehearsal. They're the person who usually comes up with, usually sometimes with help of the dramaturg, with like a concept for how they want to do it. So for like Yura, for example, decided where he wanted to be on that line between vaudeville and naturalism. Often the dramaturgs can help with that, but it's usually the director who comes in with the vision, the idea. The director's the one who tells actors where to go in the space, or the person who works closest with the designers to figure out what the look and the feel and the sound of the production is. They're the person leading the whole process. The dramaturg is a person who kind of has no or very little decision-making power in the room. The dramaturg rarely ever gets to say, well, this is how it's going to be, and this is how I want it to be, and how it's going to be that way. It's usually that the dramaturg is more of an advisor who gives suggestions to the director that they can either take or leave. Same with designers. And then producers are less involved in the creative act of making the play and more involved in how the play is being marketed to an audience, how the funding is getting, how the production is getting funded, making sure the artists have places to rehearse, things like that. Georgia, do you have any other?
Say more if it's, I don't want to monopolize here, but at some point I'd like to hear more from you or from Joe or from Georgia about the dramaturg's role. Just
Georgia, do you want to share your perspective on your job?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sophia, I think that's great. I think that the dramaturg is a little bit of the director with I guess plausible deniability in a lot of ways. As we're there in kind of a consultancy role, but I also think that the dramaturg and Sophia, you articulated this well last time, is is a kind of first audience for the director. Um, uh, and it is kind of a liaison between the director and the actors and the creative team and the audience. So I think one thing that the dramaturg is supposed to do is have like a deep working knowledge of the director's vision and like what are the elements uh, of what's happening on stage that are kind of fitting with the vision and what are the elements that are falling outside of it. So um, uh, I'll use for one example this final moment for those who saw it, the chandelier swing um, took the place of what is traditionally called the silent scene, um, uh, which in Gogol's script asks for about 90 seconds, which in stage time is like a year and a half of just complete silence and complete stillness. And there's a question for us, for Sophia and me, or for whoever the dramaturg is, to say, okay, what is that doing affectively? What is that doing to the audience? What's the intention um, uh, that Gogol's bringing to that? And then, if we're not going to do it in a silent way, are the ideas that the designers and director are bringing in the room about how to orchestrate that scene in some other auteur way um, going to create a similar effect or a certain or a similar kind of like distance from expectation that feels true to the kind of goal of Gogol's script, but perhaps happens in a different way. So we're kind of analyzing from the outside um, uh, in a way that's creative and artistic, but it also is like uh, we're critics in the room who are um, working before the play's up.
I'd just like to say one quick thing, and then ask for more comments and discussion from the audience. But the director is a late arriving artist of the theater. It was really in the 19th century when these styles that we mentioned earlier, like Sophia's symbolism, began to proliferate, each with its different set of artistic protocols. Shakespeare and Molière performed in the style of their time. They had what we call an inner directory. They didn't need an outside person standing outside the production to coordinate. The actors showed up with their parts, which were just literally their lines of dialogue and a few cues, and they put it together. They knew what to do. Similar in Molière's theater. In the theater of Gogol, it had already developed to the point where there are stylistic choices to be made. And by the end of the century, you have a smorgasbord of possible theatrical approaches. And the director, with the help of dramaturgy, figures out how to conform the particular production to those multiple styles, to make the choices between and among them. Please, more of your thoughts. Don't be shy.
Hold on. The next person will be Bob Rosenheck, and then Andrew McLaren, then Jackie, and then Francie.
Thank you, Laurie.
So I wanted to ask about the dramatic end of Act One. So here you have a sustained farce. Klestakov is hysterical, and then suddenly it turns into a nightmare of faceless people crowding him in some doom-laden nightmare. And my question was, what was the relationship of that to the original text? And how did it come about? It seems so dramatically different.
That's a great question. We call that the dream of loneliness. That's how we talked about it in rehearsal. And it's not in Gogol's script at all. But there's a line when Klestakov is he's going on and on about the wonderful life he lives in St. Petersburg. And he says, I go outside and there are 35,000 couriers looking for me. He is basically part of his dream of what his life could or should be. is that he goes outside and there are 35,000 people looking for him. Like, he is just that special. So Yura said, okay, well, that's Klestikov's dream. Well, what's Klestikov's nightmare? So the flip side of 35,000 couriers looking for him is that he would go out, and not only is nobody looking for him, but there are 35,000, or in our case, 11 people who look exactly like him. And so this dream is him. He falls asleep after dreaming about what his life could be, and he has to face the reality of what it is, which is that he's not unique, he's not special, and he's just one of a million, or 35,000, or 11 people. And so that dream came out of trying to imagine what Klestikov's inner experience is after going through this whole crazy act of imagining a different life for himself.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think I was next. Thinking about the nature of collaboration and comparing this to, say, an orchestra in which the various instruments don't get much of a say, and the bassoonist doesn't say I should get to play that louder. But I'm assuming that actors actually have some input into how the play is shaped. Is that so? And if so, how does that play out?
I think certainly in this production, the actors had a lot of input, starting with our workshop in August, which included a lot of etude work, which is basically kind of structured improvisations around scenarios in the play or scenarios slightly outside of the play. For example, the first scene, the first real scene in the play, when the mayor is woken up by his hungover colleagues, and he reads the letter. We did an etude about what was the night before, before that led them all to that kind of downcast state, and that kind of got turned into the rats, which was such a huge part of this production, which are kind of a throwaway line in Gogol's original text, but through these etudes, and through finding what was kind of interesting to the actors, different parts got incorporated, and some became quite major, like the rats. I think that throughout this process, there were a lot of kind of comedic bits that were created in the room, especially during these etudes, and then even kind of after the etudes, when the actors would just kind of be in scenes, they would find little moments to kind of riff on, and with which they could kind of vamp forever. And I think much of the process was building those up, and then much of the tech and then preview process was pairing them back and back and back and back and back, hoping that the kind of energy of the bits remained in what stayed on stage, or what stayed in the script, but that all of the length of the bits kind of were able to come out. I think that, I mean, all that is to say, if you saw the first preview, you saw a very different show than the last preview, because the actors were kind of figuring out where that playfulness lived for them, and I think that in previews, being able to hear the audience, being able to figure out where the bit was mostly for the people on stage, really kind of changed how the show developed, even over the course of a week. I think the last thing that anyone wanted the audience to feel was, oh, those people on stage are having a really wonderful time. I wish they would let me join. And I think Sophie and I, frankly, agree that there were more moments to be cut, and more moments where the bit was a little bit exclusive to who was on stage.
I just interject there to add to Andrew's point. This is the a real difference. The bassoonist, even the conductor, doesn't have a chance to cut out the bits that might be going a little long in a Mahler symphony. And the bassoonist doesn't have a chance to react to the audience while he's keeping time and playing the right note at the right time. Can we have
That's
another
exactly right.
question? Yeah, that was a great one. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Jackie, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. So I noticed before it started that part of the clothesline was out off the stage and in the audience. And I wonder if you could talk about how that came to be and what the symbolism was, or what was with the clothes on and the clothes off the clothesline.
Yeah, I think there are a few answers to that. One is sort of the joke or the character building opportunity of Klestikov is this character who everyone thinks is this amazing inspector. The fact is that when he does his laundry, he only has one pair of clothes. And so he's not wearing anything when he has to do his laundry. And we get to see him doing that. And so we learn so much about him by watching him do his laundry. But I think also from a set design perspective, traditionally this play has one moment, I think, one moment where the fourth wall is broken and the audience is talked to. And that's the very end when the mayor says, "What are you laughing at? You're laughing at yourselves." But through the set and through some other moments in this production, we sort of made the audience part of the world of the play. And so having the clothesline go across into the audience made the audience feel a little more like they were included in this world. And of course, there's the moment where the mayor's wife talks to the audience and says, "Hey, what's your name? Go find the inspector." So this production takes more opportunities than the original Gogol script does to sort of bring the audience into things. And the set was part of that.
Thank you.
I'll also just add one thing, which is that Celine Chen, who's our set designer, said as she was reading the play and also having seen 15 or 12 productions at the Rep before this one during her time here. She's a third year MFA scenic designer. She said most plays that happen at the Rep happen in some kind of symmetrical set. And when she read this, she said this is a play of absolute asymmetry. And so she wanted to include elements that would kind of destabilize the space and set something a little bit askew. So I think that was one particularly kind of searing element of asymmetry.
Thank you.
May I proceed? I just I was really interested in Sophia's conversation a while ago about how the actors perceive the audience and how the audience needs to be, at least in a presentational format, included. But I guess my reactions after the play were that at times, and I just wondered if this is, I would ask my fellow audience members perhaps about this. I found that comedy was not necessarily a bond, but a barrier to my relationship with the characters. And that there was something sort of, and this may not be the right word, but there was something very academic in the way that this play evolved for me. It was very planned. And then I began to think, well, of course it was academic. It's at Yale, duh. But I wondered, does the Rep consider its audience to be a group of people who can sort of absorb and interact with challenging work? How would this be in Peoria? It really, I remain puzzled by my reactions and actually puzzled by the play. So there I am.
I think that there's a fear I often feel about theater. I'm thinking of a specific production that was recently in New York, of King Lear that I saw where I felt that it was about, well, I felt that they weren't doing King Lear, that they were doing a play that was about the play King Lear. Um, that was kind of all of the all of the signifiers of King Lear, but not able to kind of like dive in and kind of trust that the ideas would kind of osmose or be absorbed by the audience. And I think that that's something I am attuned to, um, or try to be attuned to. One thing in the dramaturgy program is that in our first year we all take a class called New Play Dramaturgy, and as a part of that class we are instructed to give a presentation on each student picks one season of Yale Rep in the past, and they give a presentation on what brings that season together, what characterizes the plays in that season, how do they fit together, uh, looking even at the fact that after the pandemic, uh, after 2020, I should say, um, uh, the rep isn't really able to hire like a big cast. So many of the plays after 2020 have two or three or four characters, and no more. So we're looking at that kind of thing, and then we're also looking thematically. I think what that exercise gives us is a little bit of an understanding about how the rep um, is thinking about programming, and is thinking about daring work versus um, uh, work that audiences might feel, more uh, I guess familiar with, and where there's room for someone to kind of take a big risk. I think with a production like this, it's interesting because we're getting a director who is a big star in Russia, um, and is then coming here with some risky ideas and some kind of risky aesthetics that don't necessarily fit with um, what the rep generally programs, um, and where we're actually like really not sure where or how it's going to land. Um, uh, but that said, I think that it really shifts with each production. Um, and it's been interesting for me to read reviews of people who generally, review rep shows really positively and openly, and people who are perhaps coming from uh, New York or from a kind of European landscape, and where people are coming at this from. So um, certainly not a completely cohesive answer, but I I think probably each of us in the dramaturgy program has a different opinion of the rep's understanding of its audience.
I'd add on to that super briefly that Yura, the director, is coming from Russia, where this play is one of the best known plays that there is. It's one of the most famous pieces of dramatic literature, certainly. And I think the chair of our department, Catherine Sheehy, told us to keep in mind the fact that Yura is directing a production that is a new interpretation of the inspector with the traditional interpretation in his head, and that not everyone, including us, has that same level of knowledge. So I think in some ways, this is a production that is about the inspector, or about the traditional take on the inspector, more than it is the inspector itself. And that's something that it causes different reactions depending on where you're coming from and how much of this production you've been exposed to.
Yeah, that's very helpful to see this in the perspective of American theater, where people have often just one or two chances to see a play like this, where in European theaters, a play like this is just part of the repertoire, and you see it many times over a lifetime of theater going. And so in different ways, with different challenges. We still have some hands up, I see.
Yeah, Kay Hendon, go ahead.
Hi. I know this is probably the topic of multiple courses, but I'm very curious about what the audience reaction was to the first productions of this play? And also, what do we know about the author's interactions with people like you, with the initial director and dramaturge or the equivalent thereof?
I can start with one of the things. A lot of people really hated the play when it first premiered, because they were used to a kind of comedy that was coming from France, that was vaudeville, that was not very political, very funny, very comedic, very just sort of like a nice, comfortable dinner theater that we laugh at and then chat about a bit and then forget about. And this play was political, and that it was really doing comedy in a way that people were really not familiar with, made a lot of people angry. It didn't feature a love story very prominently, although there is a little bit of one, a strange one in The Inspector. And people would say, "Oh, that's not how comedy goes. Comedy should end in a wedding. I should feel good about myself at the end of it," and I don't. So yeah, people responded negatively, not universally, but a lot of people were mad. Georgia, do you want to add anything to that?
Thanks.
I have a lot of talking behind me right now. So Sophia, if you want to tackle the other question too. There's dialogue happening on breaks.
Yeah, in the history of the theater, it's interesting some of the masterpieces that we continually come back to and fascinated were at their initial production failures or problematic. Moliere's Misanthrope was confusing to contemporary audiences. It made demands on them by ending with a romance that dissolves before your eyes in the last moments. You know, no one was ready for that, because in comedy you think of a couple getting together, and that's the marriages have ended comedies since the Greeks, but artists will take a convention, they'll take those expectations and they'll tweak them in a way that pushes the art further, so that next time we might even appreciate the old convention more, but we'll never see it in exactly the same way, having seen it violated in an innovative kind of production or a kind of writing. We are
Thanks.
coming up on the end of the hour, Lori. I just consult you about putting a button on this.
We can go another, 5-10 minutes if there's more to be said.
Does anyone have a question or further comment? We've had some really good ones. I've found the remarks coming from Home Haven very stimulating and responsive to the production.
Mm-hmm.
Is anyone who has a word to say not spoken?
Bob?
Yeah, so I happen to have seen the play twice. And the first time, the ending was just I thought incredible, just really powerful. The sweeping of the chandelier almost hitting us in the audience, and that turn just was very powerful and capped the whole production. The other time, it was as if the actor didn't want to say his words. It was like totally suppressed, and I was there. My brother was there. He didn't get it at all. He barely heard it. And I wonder if there's an explanation for that kind of variability, or that's just one of the things that happened, or the audience or myself was differently attuned. It's not often that you see the same play twice, but it had such a different impact the second time.
I will say that I think Sophia and I have collectively seen the play 900 times, and it had a different impact almost every night. I took many friends to see it, and each time there were some moments when the audience would be, laughing really wonderfully right before, and so that moment really hit, and it took several kind of inquiries from Brandon, who played the mayor, to get them to say, "Oh, he's talking to us about our laughing." and there's a certain impact that had. And then I think there were other nights when the audience would not be laughing, and so for him to turn to the audience and say, "Why are you laughing?" Struck as a moment of, okay, is he commenting on something we were doing earlier? And that hits in a completely different in a completely different way, or it doesn't hit, um, or there's some kind of backpedaling in my mind as an audience member. And so yeah, it's also one of those one of the kind of challenges of a presentational moment, at least, uh, like that, is that the inconsistencies, I think, of a more representational show might appear more subtly. There might be just a kind of groove that people get into or have a hard time getting into on stage that an audience can feel or not feel, or if they do feel it from seeing it twice, it may be because of nanoseconds of rhythmic mismatch or matching. In a play like this, it's like these uh, these moments of different impact happen with kind of such volume that it's really noticeable when there's a different sense in the audience or a different sense on stage. There's a and this also goes for comedy, because the response to a comedy is naturally going to be louder than it is to a drama. Um, and for us being able to be in the audience and notice that, and be able to kind of like not only gauge by feel, but gauge by volume what the reaction was, I think was interesting, often troubling, often exciting.
Well, speaking of double performances, I want to thank you all for having come twice. It was great to have an anticipation of this and an explanation of the roles, and great to be able to ask questions, having seen it. We have one comment. Jean Kerr, you want to ask a question?
By all means.
You need to unmute yourself.
I just wanted to say that in some long-running shows where the stage manager takes over the management of the production, that they don't like changes from one performance to another. Their job is to keep the continuity of the director's concept, and they will often correct you if you stray from what the director's idea was. So I just thought I'd throw that in. A university theater might have more opportunity for the cast members to try different things than a long-running.
Thank you, Jen. That is a professional perspective. You've been there on that stage. I'm just so glad you chimed in with that, and it's quite true. In the 18th and 19th century, actors were fined if they forgot their lines or improvised in an impermissible way. It was actually a penalty to their salary. I don't think that happens as much anymore, and certainly not a student production.
Never heard of any fines, but you'd get notes from the stage manager.
Absolutely.
And that happened a few times in the run of The Inspector. Actors would add things in and they'd be told not to.
Yep. But no fines.
No fine. No fine.
Well, thank you, everyone. It's really great to hear your comments and to hear your thoughts on this experience that we all had together. That doesn't happen very much anymore with the isolating effects of streaming and Zooming and the rest. That everyone is in the same room and can share the experience and their response. Thanks, Home Haven, for making it possible.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you
You're
all.
welcome.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you for having
everyone.
us.
Thank you,
Thanks so
Sophia.
much, everyone. Yeah.
Bye-bye. Let's
So
do
long.
it again, Joe. Let's do it again sometime.
Okay, you bet.